I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. How many of you have run into a situation where a leader is quite the visionary, goes after the newest shiny object, and is quite passionate about it, and yet has a hard time operationalizing it, and in a sense creates chaos as a result of those moves and actions? I'm finding that happening quite a bit. I love these high energy visionary leaders, but again, they sometimes struggle with being able to not only bring people on board for that vision, but also finding a way to operationalize it and bring it into fruition. And I think it speaks to a larger issue around, one, we absolutely have to continue to innovate, especially during this time of great change and the speed of change being as fast as it is, AI, et cetera, and the knowledge that if we aren't going to innovate, we're probably going to be dying. And then two, this other strong need to engage people in the process. We no longer are kind of top down, just do as I say, but we need to create a culture, a growth minded culture by which people will not only buy into the innovation, but also find ways to implement it. And that tension, I think, is really what the interview that I'm about ready to have here is all about, is that combination of those two things. And the guy that I've talked to is just really fascinating. His name is Eric Charran, and he's a visionary technology executive, thought leader, and author of a book called Have You Ever Had a Boss That? Succeeding in a Dysfunctional Workplace. With over 25 years of experience in leading transformative initiatives at Fortune 500 companies like Microsoft, Capital One, Eric has built a reputation for bridging the gap between cutting-edge technology and effective leadership. His groundbreaking book explores the challenges of navigating workplace toxicity and difficult managers, offering an actionable strategies for professionals at every career stage. Passionate about empowering others, Eric blends his expertise in organizational dynamics and digital innovation to inspire leaders to create healthier, more productive workplaces. Eric Charran on the Leadovation podcast. Well, Eric, it's great to have on the show. I want to ask you kind of a lead-in question here. It is apparent, at least in my mind, that if you're not learning faster than your competition, you're probably going to fall behind. And we have to create those learning organizations. And one of the big things that everybody seems to be constantly scrambling to learn is around AI. It's around technology. It's about being more innovative. We can't keep doing the same things over and over again if we're going to survive and thrive. So if we all kind of agree on that, I think that makes sense. But there's a point that you have, I think, in your book and some of the stuff that I found about you, that sometimes cutting edge technology and effective leadership don't necessarily match. Why is that? I mean, I sense that. I think people who hear this would say, yeah, that seems right. But could you unpack why that is so?
Yeah, I can give you my perspective, and I think there's a saying that we used to have in consulting, which is like, the best way to be a good consultant, especially when you're starting out, is just to be 5 minutes ahead of your client, right? And so,
Mm.
in terms of what you know and what you've learned, just be 5 minutes ahead, and they'll never know the difference. So, little trade secret there. But I think if there's always a diametric tension between leadership and cutting edge technology. Some leaders are lean into innovation and they look for the promise in things and say that, hey, I know what we're doing now, but I have a vision for what's ahead and what's in the future. And if this innovation, whatever it might be, whether it's quantum computing or generative AI or AI wrapper apps or what have you, vibe coding can get us there faster, and I can understand the promise of this and translate that into ROI, which is hard dollars, then let's lead into it. Let's set up rapid learning experiments. Let's like explore what the bounds of this thing are and what they can be. Let's set up a model of what's working well. To me, that's one class of leader, and those folks are rare.
Hmm.
The other classification of leader is, hey, I have operational mechanisms. I have routines. I am responsible for systems. I'm responsible for security. I'm responsible for making sure that every time that somebody swipes a credit card or uses Apple Pay, that the transaction flows through our systems and we do fraud detection. I am naturally averse to anything that might come in claiming that it can do a better job and then destabilize that potential. And so I am wary. I am on the lookout for things. I love things the way that they are. Sure, things would be great if they could get better, but I am naturally risk averse until there's some external pressure, the board, the industry, competitors driving me to do things differently. I won't want to hear about what the possibilities are until I'm being forced to. Now, you might say, hey, Eric, those are two giant, diametrically opposed extremes. And sometimes there are people that are in the middle. There are people that are at that one end that say, hey, I wish I could lean more into innovation. And I am naturally curious. And I want to understand the way the world's going to be and what our competitors are doing, but I can't in this case. But maybe I can in this other case. And there are
Hmm.
people that are all the way at the, in between the other end, which is, gosh, I wish I could to benefit, but I can't destabilize this thing that I've got going, for example. So I think that those are the reasons that I think about in terms of the leadership classifications and why there's this natural tension between cutting edge technology and leadership.
What about the leader who totally embraces the innovation that is before them, and yet they may not necessarily be able to translate that disruption into their organizations to be able to manage the chaos that that
Right,
disruption creates, or under resources the changes that are needed because they've got the new shiny object that they run after. Talk
right.
about that a little bit, and I guess in the end, where I'm going with this, Eric, is if we kind of understand the problem here, how do we solve for it? So that's maybe the next question.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of what I get into in the book. Have you ever had a boss that? But largely, listen, I think that there's this concept of leaders that are like, hey, I see the promise. And what we have to resist, what leaders have to resist, is the burn the ships moment, in which everybody boards a ship. We say the cloud is our destination, and then we get to the other side. We're going to burn the ships. We're never
Mm.
going back. And listen, that is noble, and that's fantastic if you can make that happen. But those moments are rare because in order to achieve the burn the ships moment, you have to have specific ROI capability to understand that, hey, if we do this, this is how much my organization is going to make or save in doing so. And not only is that my hypothesis, but I can actually prove it. And I proved it by starting small with a small use case. I set up a working model of what's good. I work with my favorite technology providers, my favorite technologies, my strategic technology partners. Notice I didn't say vendors. And
Hmm.
I set this up in a model, and I can realistically observe that we've taken one use case live. So galactic thinking and burn the ships right from the start are usually the death knell for things like this. This is why these many of these transformations fail. The other reasons why transformations fail, I go back to it, is ROI, because a lot of companies and a lot of organizations bet on the possibility of this working out without being able to measure whether it's working out. To me, it's what's the value, what's the cost of goods sold, and where's the margin. Once you can articulate those three things, then you have credible foundations to pursue your hypotheses. But again, it's not a galactic launch, right? It's a slow, gradual buildup with confidence.
Iterative. Yeah,
Yep.
right. I get it. Prove it, test it, prove it, test it. Yeah, I get that. That makes a lot of sense. So I think the other thing that you are making me aware of again is the employee side of the equation and the mindset they have. You might have a very vivacious, very compelling, visionary leader who sees the promised land, if you will. We got to do this. This makes sense. And they might even lean behind it. They might even throw some resources towards it. but you might have an employee base that says, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. And you're asking me to do something where I might fail. I'm not necessarily comfortable with that. How do you change the mindset of those who have to implement the new technology?
You have to create the term I'm drawn to, and I don't know if this applies because I'm not a clinician, but psychological safety,
Well, that's a
which
great, no,
is
it's a great topic. I love it. So go ahead.
right.
Yeah.
You have to create psychological safety. Many people, especially in technology, and this is based on my experience. Maybe I shouldn't make a sweeping generalization, but there are technology people again at both ends of a spectrum, which is a fixed mindset, which is I created this thing. This thing seems to be working. I can lock it in a closet. It's rock solid. It's been operating for years. Sure, it's not perfect. Sure, it has outages. I can predict those outages. I know exactly what to do. There's a playbook for that and I know how to repair it, and everyone's happy with it. Why would I mess with that? Right. So that's one end.
Hmm.
The other end is, gosh, we can do this better. Sure, it's working, but it can be better. It can be. I can eliminate 90% of the failures. I can actually infuse it with these new capabilities, and that would lead us to this level of possibility and these capabilities. The challenge with that innovative leaders, and I'll answer it from this perspective since you asked about the innovative leader, is if you don't create that psychological safety and you don't prove it, then you are kind of like this. We used to call it at Microsoft, it was the people that we used to call them pipe smokers, but it's people that smoke like the old timey English pipes. And they
Uh
would
huh.
sit back in like the smoking chair with their smoking jackets and look at the wisps of smoke and be like, things should be this way. Things shouldn't be that way. And things should be this other way. And there's always room for that. And but if people agree with you, yeah, they should be that way, but I'm not going to be the one to go out on a limb and change it, right?
Yeah.
So what you have to do as that type of leader is you have to create this safe zone to say, hey, what if we could have an experiment? We could experiment consequence free. We can leverage credits from our biggest software provider to help, their pre-sales budget to help us stand up a working model of what's good. And the benefit you get is a safe place to prove out this works, to de-risk it, to focus on what's possible. And then once you're sure it's working, then we leverage our system integrators to help take it bigger and broader. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you will become this smoking jacket pipe smoker that's just with these noble assertions. And people will not follow you to that new burn the ships moment.
Yeah, you may have heard about this before, but this idea around psychological safety, I think, takes on a kind of a component of I am not afraid, or I am afraid if I don't have psychological safety to speak up and say, this idea sucks, or I have
Hmm.
concerns about it, or what if this falls apart? And because we're trained and we are reinforced and we are compensated on being a quote unquote team player,
Hmm.
we don't want to say the emperor has no clothes, right? We don't want to say I have a concern about this. I'm not sleeping well at night. There's a, I think that you've heard it before. It's called a pre-mortem, where before
Hmm.
the project starts, for those of you who haven't heard this before, Eric is shaking his head yes on this one. You basically ask a group of people who are about ready to take on some sort of new project, could be one for technology or innovation, and say, let's just imagine this thing is 5 years out and that completely fails. Let's talk about how it could possibly fail. And you give people individual time with post-it notes to really just exhaust and flush out all of those concerns. And then you roll them up and talk about it. So that psychological safety says, I can talk about the concerns that before I thought were not safe in which to do so. And now you start
Right.
getting people engaged in solutions, and now it's safe enough to say, I got a problem with this. What are your thoughts on that?
It's
Have
a
you used that?
fantastic, yeah, it's a fantastic practice because it exposes those people that have more of a fixed mindset or are failure adverse
Mm,
to it actually it's exposure therapy because you're
yeah,
exposing yourself to what could go wrong ahead of it actually going wrong.
right.
And once your brain has kind of said, well, gosh, well, it's not only what could go wrong, it's what are the implications? What would leadership say if they knew that this thing failed?
Yeah.
And then how should we look at it differently? And that led me to formulate when I'm pitching these things, because I do trend more towards the innovative thought leadership. We should be going in this direction. We can make it better. In fact, to my wife's chagrin, I try to make everything better. And she's like, you don't always have to make everything better. Just leave it alone. Right. So
It's
that's where
okay.
I am on that spectrum. But in order to not be the person that's been in the margins, which I have been before because I haven't paid attention to this, is you have to be able to say, here's what our focus is. Our focus is not to succeed in this technology experiment or this adventure in technology. It's not, it's fantastic if we do, but our learnings is what matters. We
Hmm.
learned more through failure than we do from success. That's a fact. And so if we fail, it's still a success. And ultimately, the pre-mortems help people that are not in that mindset get there because it's like exposure therapy. We failed, but what would we have learned in this failure?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is what the measure of success is. If we can go back to leadership and say, we learned these things, we experimented with ahead of time so that we didn't have to do this in the real world with real technology. And that is a benefit if you tell the story right.
Absolutely. So why did you write the book? I mean, you've got a great background. You've worked at some wonderful companies. We talked before we hit the record button that you've traveled all over the world. So why spend the time writing this book around this disconnect between the leader and the dysfunction that sometimes comes when they try to adapt into some new technology? What's the burning platform for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, I guess I'm a Gen Xer, Dean, so I've been around for a while. 25 plus years of experience, if you count my first position to now. There were no terms like psychological safety or bring your whole
Mm,
self to work. You just had to put up with your boss because your boss had had your career velocity and your economic prosperity like in their hands.
yeah.
So if they would freak out or they would like betray you in a meeting or they would do all sorts of weird things, it must be me. I must not be right, and this is just part of me getting my stripes. Wait till I'm in that leadership position, right? And that's
Yeah.
the way that it was for me for many years. And I would venture to take a guess that most of the Gen Xers or folks that have been in the business space for a corporate space for a while, it's very similar. However, it took me maybe 10-ish years ago to realize that some of these unhelpful behaviors that I've been witness to throughout my early part of my career are recurring. So I I was experiencing a particular incident about again, I call them manager archetypes in the books, and
Hmm.
the reason I do that is because I don't want to say that there are bad people out there. There are just people that have a toolbox of leadership tools, and some of them are the wrong tools for the job. So, but I began to realize that these unhelpful behaviors started to repeat. And I feel like, hey, I've been here before. I've seen this behavior before. This is what I think they're going to do next. And
Hmm.
this is what I used last time to get over this, around this, to help them grow and resolve this situation. What if I tried that here? And so the shock and horror of the occurrence seemed to decrease. My first session with one of my managers when I was younger was we were working all night on the slide deck. We were sending drafts around for the entire team. It was a presentation for a cloud initiative. This was when cloud computing was new. We were making a recommendation to the C-suite and the board, and my manager was going to be in the meeting. We were sending this person these decks at the same time so they could see in line what we were doing. And then when we got into the session, who greenlit this project? Why are we doing this again? Do we think that there's value here? They deconstructed
Hmm.
our entire, and they were the biggest adversary. Now you might say, well, hey, maybe that manager was being strategic. They were being the bad guy so that the other people would feel sympathy and then kind of come down on the hardworking folks that put the presentation together. This was not the case. That's originally what I thought, because who would try to sabotage their own employee in a meeting? This, by the way, is a archetype that I write about in the book. It's called the surprised manager,
Hmm.
and or the amnesiac manager, the people that just forget. They honestly forget, and it comes out in the worst way possible. However, the third or fourth time I encountered this in a different manager, I'm like, oh, I know what to do here. Look at this. I've been here before.
Hmm.
But what I realized, Dean, is I was keeping all that information to myself, and I was surviving and thriving, but other people were tripping over and stepping on these landmines, and I was like, wait a second, wait, don't, and then it would explode, right? So it actually took me until I was more senior in my career. So my first VP role, me and a bunch of VPs were sitting around and we are commiserating about our manager who had multiple archetypes in a single person, which was unprecedented for me. But we would trade stories once we were comfortable complaining to each other around like, hey, can you believe they did this? Oh, yes. And this is what they're going to do next. Oh, I've seen them do this. Do this instead to compensate for that. And we started giving the behaviors, funny little names. And then somebody said, "Hey, we should write this down." And I said, "You know what? I'll
Hmm.
write it down." And that's where the book came from.
Great story. So, what's the most common archetype?
Boy, that's a good question. I think the ones in which the leader is under enormous pressure to deliver results. So there is a common motivation or a reasoning behind why these people resort to these unhelpful behaviors. The first is there are no other tools in their toolbox. Right? This is what they have, and these behaviors are what they've seen other leaders do, and they say, well, if I'm a good leader, I must behave like the leader I had last, or the leader that I admire. And it's all these unhelpful behaviors, and these things persist in silence. So the archetypes that are probably the most common are the ones in which you're just on overload. The
Hmm.
attack sub manager, somebody that just runs silent and deep and then surfaces at the last minute, right before Friday afternoon, and fires all these missiles. We have a presentation on Monday. Hopefully you can include this. And you're like, wait, wait, wait. I have five questions in order to make this a valuable presentation, and they've sunk beneath the waves. They've gone silent again. No
Hmm.
Slacks reach them, no texts reach them, no emails reach them until right before the presentation they erupt again. This thing's terrible. It's off the mark. We're just going to have to do our best, right? So they're launching missiles and then they go back under the water. The amnesiac, which I find myself being part of, solving the same problem two, three times in
Hmm.
slightly different ways because you're just under such immense pressure and load. Short-term memories don't make it to long-term memory. And so you don't have that backing, you don't have that understanding. Another one is the emergency broadcaster, in which things that they know are going to happen, they forget, and then all of a sudden they get reminded at 7:30 in the morning, and they hold the 7:30 a.m. VP, "Hey, who's on deck for this? Who's on first? Who's on second? Who's on third?" meeting, while you're trying to drop off your kids, while you're getting on and off trains, while you're trying to get your coffee at Starbucks. So these are all the most common causes for these manifestations and these behaviors because you're just under such immense load and immense pressure, and you just never have that transition where you have time to sit back and be like, you know what? I think I got it. I'm going to amplify in this meeting. I'm going to support in this meeting. I know why we're doing these things already, and I'm going to walk in and be a unified front.
You sort of said it, but I'll call it out. Is that the landscape of leadership and technology and innovation has changed since you were younger? I mean,
Hmm.
we've been around. I've been around for a while as well. I remember as a consulting company, we did some work with Microsoft years ago. Back in the
Hmm.
'90s, right? And love the guys and gals who are working there. But there was truly a culture of we're going to throw you off the deep end of the pool. And if you can swim and survive, you're in. If you can't, that was our way of sorting you out. There wasn't
That's
anything
right.
about development. We could care less about how you felt about the work and your leadership. It was just sink or swim. And that was your first 90-day sort of rite of passage, and
Right.
we got it. And a lot of companies were dealing that way. Certainly, it seems like technology companies, but things have changed a lot. This whole person
Hmm.
perspective that you've been talking about. And one of the things that I've been, I guess, keenly aware of, like we do a lot of strategic planning. I'm involved with, ideation conversations, some of them around innovation, is that we always find time during the process to go to the other side of the ledger and work on the team, work on the
Hmm.
communication, work on the trust, work on the psychological safety. And you really have pretty much said it, is that these are two sides of the same coin. That if you don't have that internal um, set of efficiencies and trust and culture, it's going to affect your innovative processes. That
Right.
the inside culture affects the outside results. And we have to work on both together, because one out of balance with the other falls apart.
You got it. I was a student. I got to watch this happen at Microsoft as I grew up in my professional career. I spent 18, maybe close to 20 years there. And I was there for the cultural transition, the transition
Mm,
between the Gates Ballmer era and the Nadella era, where he
got it.
changed the company's culture. In fact, one of my favorite books that even changed how I parented my kids at the time was Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Mm.
And Satya required all senior leaders to read it, and I got it in the mail, and I put it on my desk, and I said, "I'm Eric Charran, of course, on growth mindset." And then there was a meeting in which is a very fixed mindset thing to say, by the way. But there was
That's
a
why it's so ironic. It's so funny.
right, right. So I went. They're like, hey, you're going to have time as part of this leadership program. You're going to have time to spend with Satya. Make sure you read the book. Don't go in there without having read the book. And so I read it on the. I started reading it on the plane. First 10 pages changed my entire life. Like
Huh.
in terms of, looking at how I had achieved success at Microsoft. Now, I certainly never left a trail of bodies behind me, but the index of what was successful at Microsoft was what you achieved, not how you achieved it.
Right.
And in the post Nadella era, it's who did you bring along? How did you achieve it? And what did you learn? And then
Mm.
what was the result? Was it an achievement or was it a learning?
Yep.
And we even changed the term from feedback to perspectives because feedback, it's a diplomatic term, maybe when we were coming up, but now it means negative.
Yeah.
Like, when have you ever had somebody say, hey, I got some feedback for you, and it was terrific feedback, right?
It sounds like
So
you've
we
got to be
changed it to
put on the
perspective.
defensive. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we changed even our and I don't know if this is the way it still is today, but we changed it from a feedback cycle to a perspective cycle,
Interesting. That's great.
just to change the way in which your brain is your central nervous system is wired to instead of look for threats and to try to defend against failure. And one of the things I used to tell my team was if you can't remember the last time you failed at something and you're proud of it, you're doing it wrong. Now, certainly that means never fail. You want to try to minimize the ways you fail. You don't want to fail the same way twice or three times. But a failure is to be celebrated. Now, again, that doesn't mean you can operate consequence free. You have to be bold, but not silly. So you have to try to make sure that you're making progress. But at
Right.
the same time, failure is not something to be avoided. It's something to be celebrated.
So, do you have a story you could tell us with respect to a client that you've been dealing with where they've gone through this process around, moving towards this more of a holistic approach towards innovation and leadership so that they're not sort of these separate camps, where they're butting into each other and then there's friction, but it's all part of the same family.
I wish I could tell you a great story with a. I can tell you a story, but it's not a great story because maybe it is because in the end it worked and it worked out, but it was rife with just um, I'll call it downward spirals in which we
Yeah.
pulled out at the end. So this tension, and I was learning this entire process as I went through it. So the innovators or an innovator's dilemma, not the innovator's dilemma, is one in which
You're
you
talking about
have
the
the great
book or are you
idea.
talking about the phrase?
I'm using the book as the book's title
As
as
the
a
met.
phrase.
Okay. Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So an innovator's dilemma is one in which you see the future and it is so clear to you, and everybody in principle agrees, yeah, that's the way it should be. And you take that as a signal to be like, well, this is the right way to go, and it's evident. Everybody should see it. And when you start taking it to people that are going to have to invest time, money, and resources into it, then it becomes, oh, well, I don't know about that.
Hmm.
You get frustrated, and so you double down and you explain more and you go deeper, and you're like, no, no, no. Here's the value. Here's why we should do this. Everybody else is doing this. Here's all the data. Here's the research. Here's the pilot we've done. And they go, yeah, yeah, I agree, but it just doesn't feel right about now. It's not the right time for this, or we need to wait for this. And you are like, your head's exploding in these different directions. And that causes you to become more polarized to like, well, I got to go bolder and bigger and show these people more of what's and the more you do that, the farther they will go away from that because now it's like you're running around the organization with knives and scissors, right? And you're going to not only
Hmm.
trip and hurt yourself, but hurt other people. So what I realized is that you then have to get people to a place where they will understand you, and they feel that you have listened to them, that you understand their perspectives. So the innovator has to come back from that extreme of proving I'm right and proving this is the right way to go. And yes, we're going to walk off a cliff if we don't, but if no one's willing to listen to you, then you're just shouting into the wind. What I realized a long time ago is that people make emotional choices and they
Hmm.
seek logic and reason to back it up. They don't
Yes.
make logical choices first and then get emotionally attached to it.
That's true.
So what you have to do is you have to identify with the emotional kernel that's causing them to cling to this fallacy or this thing that you want to change by saying, hey, if I were sitting behind your desk, this is how I think you feel. Let me know if I'm right about that. What I hear you saying is what I hear you saying is, yeah, those 5 words really carries enormous weight. Then giving them a break. Don't go in and pitch your idea. Just let them sit with the fact that you understand them and then come back later and restate what you understand and say, like, hey, I think we can do this. If we minimize the risk and we develop this safe space and we experiment and we don't experiment to succeed, we experiment to learn. The only failure in this instance is if we don't learn anything. That is a much different proposition to saying that, hey, we should go with the cloud. We should start experimenting with quantum computing. We should do, generative AI, all these different things. So my idea around, and this is prevalent throughout the book, is emotional intelligence and empathizing and getting people to a space where they understand that you understand is super important. And that's what I think innovators must be able to do.
Talk about the dynamic of an innovative leader who would see something that could be considered intuitive. You might
Mhm.
throw in some emotions to that. You might feel a certain way about it, but there's a certain sort of sixth sense. There's a certain sort of knowing. And and certainly the people that I've talked to are who would be considered to be innovators or movement makers in their industry, part of their secret sauce, part of their superpower is this intuitive knowing that they seem to
Mhm.
trust. And I've heard people say the higher up you go in an organization, the more your intuition becomes a source of your strength. So if all
Right.
that's true, then if that is part of what happens, that's part of the what accesses the ability to see something or to innovate is this intuitive side. Then how do you convince other people that your intuition is right when there's no data to support it?
The at Microsoft, we used to have a phrase that Missouri is the show me state, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's their state motto. At least that's what
Yep.
they told me. I've actually never checked that, but Missouri being the
I
show
think
me
it is.
state.
Well, look it
You think
up.
it is? Okay.
Yeah.
But so we would say in a session, we would all sit around and we would be the smoking jacket pipe smokers looking at wisps and being like, this is the way the world should be. And at some point, somebody had to say, Missouri, it's time to show me. And so certainly emotional IQ, getting people to understand, getting them to buy in before you go do the show me moment is important because if people have emotionally bonded with their choice and it's in opposition to what you're trying to show and you do go to show it, regardless of whether or not you've shown success or you've shown learnings, they're going to be like, no, nope, I don't care, right? And so you can come to them with a syringe and says it's going to prick a little bit, but this holds the cure to all your ills. They're going to be like, no, I don't want that. I'd rather suffer with what I have because what's what I know. So you have to do that emotional intelligence, that understanding, empathizing homework first to get them to buy into the process. Then you have to show it. If and the more senior leader you become, the larger the organization is, the more risk averse they are. But they do value innovation, but every organization wants to beat you into the shape that is the culture of that organization. The only way around this and to innovate and to disrupt is to demonstrate something with a calculable ROI and then get people to buy in through emotional intelligence. If you can show somebody concrete results and they are expecting to see it and they're open to learning from it, that is the key to success I found.
So it's a show me the litmus test or the stage to move into decision, or could we say I've got a hunch, call it intuition about something. We've never tried it before. It's a brand new technology. It's a brand new app. It's a brand new approach. You put whatever, fill in whatever blank you want.
Hmm.
We're not going to, throw everything into this. We're not going to spend millions of dollars on this
Right.
because the risk is too high. But on this hunch, we're going to do a pilot program
Exactly right.
and see how it turns out. So that's so there may be no show me yet. There's
The
just
show me
let's go
is
try it and then we'll have a show me.
Yes, the show me is what happens after you're done trying it. I have
Okay.
a hunch. I have a hunch. I've gotten your buy-in that I'm going to go do this hunch. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm just going to go do it. It's going to be minimal effort, minimal investment. I'm going to leverage a strategic technology partner and
Yep.
we're just going to go do it. And we'll come back to you and let you know what we found. In the meantime, you are doing your emotional empathizing, your understanding, you're building consensus, you're getting people to orient themselves that if this thing is successful, your hunch was right, then we should change, right? You are figuring out who your red lights, yellow lights, and green lights are, and then you are saying that, hey, come into the kitchen with us. Let me show you what we're working on. I'd love you to be part of it. And you're building this consensus around this experiment. And if it fails or if it succeeds, the result to remember is we learned something, and here are the learnings.
So I see sometimes in these very innovative leaders that they get so much juice out of the exploration of the idea, and
Hmm.
they go after it with great energy and commitment. And then you have those who are the operators, the individuals who are
Hmm.
on the ground doing the work. And I think that sometimes we get into it. I'm curious what you think about that. These leaders sometimes get disappointed when those rank and file operators don't buy into it at the same emotional level that they do. And they think like,
Yes.
why aren't these people buying into it? This is the greatest thing since sliced cheese. And then maybe we've got the wrong expectation. Maybe we don't need to have the level of passion that the innovative leader has for this new idea. Maybe it's just enough that we trust you
Hmm.
and you've given us enough information. We don't get it the way you get it, but we trust you. We trust the ELT with the board or whoever it might be. We will go along with it, but don't ever expect us to be so bought into it at the same level that you are, and then feel disappointed that we're not there with you.
Yeah. So there, I think you hit on something really important. There was this level of trust at Microsoft that when Bill said something or when Satya said something, we would be like, oh, is that the way the world's going to be? Well, then
Ah,
my entire world needs to change because those guys, I trust them.
yes,
There are also leaders, like you said, which are like, hey, the world's going to change and this is what it means for us. And there are people that are like, you're new here. I don't know if you really get how things are done here.
yes.
Things
You didn't
here
grow
work
up
a
through the
little bit
ranks
differently.
either. Yeah, you're an
Right.
external hire. We found you in the market.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's the way things are done at Google and Amazon
yeah,
and Meta, but here we're different. Like you just
right.
can't come in here and just start doing things your own way.
Even though you were
And you
paid to
have to,
do that. Yeah,
exactly. I'm going to beat you into the shape of what represents this company, right? And I'm going to get
yeah.
all that Google and Meta stuff out of you until you start sounding one like one of us, right?
We're going to Googleize
Um,
you.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so the very thing that you were brought there to do as a leader, you are now just sitting here one day being like, I am just like the rest of these people. I've become
Yeah.
one of them.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily what it brings me energy.
Right.
So the question becomes like, how adept are you at inspirational organizational change management? Now, that's not a real thing. It's something I just I tend to say, but you need to earn those stripes. And the
Yep.
way to earn those stripes are by having wins. But how do you get your first win? To me, getting your first win is starting small, proving it out. But then you also, again, you can provide irrefutable evidence as to why you're right, and people will still not listen. The homework is, why do you think that this is going to fail? Help me understand the way things are done here. What if we could do things differently? What's your perspective? Like, what's the biggest thing you think that could go wrong? Do you even think this is valuable and why not?
Mm.
Those are all things that you can do to build an emotional platform of understanding with an individual, even your reddest of red lights. And then you can actually bring them along to say, you know what, I think you're going to be instrumental for this because I need somebody to look over my shoulder, make sure I'm doing this the way that this organization does things. And so I need you as an advisor. Would you like to be part of this? Right?
Yes.
Those are all techniques that work in bringing somebody along, even if they're the reddest of red lights.
That's great. Eric, I think you've really hit upon something. This topic, the more I'm hearing you talk, the more I feel like it's Tommy because we're at this. On one hand, I've heard this phrase before and I've used it before in this podcast. The speed of change right now is the slowest it's going to be for the rest of our lives. That's a pretty bold thing to say, but in some
Yeah.
ways it's scary as hell, but it's also probably true. On the other hand, the way we're doing business and leadership is different. It's not the way you and I used to have it when we grew up. Just do it, do as you're told, and don't, say anything. Emotional
Hmm.
intelligence and psychological safety and bringing people along to the innovation, this growth mindset, is now the engine that's driving so much of this innovation. Whereas
Right.
before it was just go do, right? And I think
Hmm.
that we've sort of seen this humanistic evolution with the speed of all this change kind of coming together. And I think that's what you're talking about. So I'm really, really glad that you were able to show up on this podcast. Tell people more about the book, what it's about, how to connect with it and you and your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is titled Have You Ever Had a Boss That's Surviving and Thriving in a Dysfunctional Workplace? The book is a kind of like the way I tried to write it is more of a narrative. So I think a lot of self-help books or professional help books talk about very, very valuably like what you should do, what the advice is, and how you should implement it. Makes total sense. For me, I wanted something more illustrative. So I actually have characters based on experiences from my life. Names have been changed to protect the innocent, but it's actually like reading a novel. It's like reading a narrative. Like, you wake up in the morning, you have a Slack message, and you're like, I don't know if we're going to be ready for this presentation. What do? I get all my VPs on the phone for a 7:30 a.m. meeting. I don't care where they are. I know their calendars can't be busy this early in the morning, so I'm going to just blow up their mornings, right? And so that's one of the first archetypes, which is the emergency broadcaster. Everything's an
Yeah.
emergency. And so like so that's the narrative I begin with. And then I dive into, well, what's the motivation? Why do people do this? Understanding why will help you realize that it's not you. In many instances, and in most cases, it's them. It's just them with the wrong tools in the toolbox. The wrong tool is to try to just throw a bomb on someone's calendar when you know that they can't be busy because they're transitioning from their personal to professional life and just to destroy their mornings, right? That's the wrong tool for that. So then we try to dive into giving advice about what to do. How do you grow your manager? How do you let them know? Because these behaviors persist in silence. And if we just accept them and we just say, all right, this is just the way it's going to be, I just have to deal with it. That's not the right approach, in my opinion. And so I articulate that in the book. The question, though, becomes, well, yeah, sure, maybe I should start documenting things. Maybe I should start preemptively anticipating how my manager is going to forget this. But what's the right way to talk about that? Like, I don't really know. And so I have an actual dialogue that I use that I recall changed. It's almost reads just like a script, right?
Yeah.
About how I navigated through that. And then it's like putting it all together, taking the emotional, the motivation, the scenario, and then just like bundling it all up. And I do that for 9 archetypes, 9 sets of these challenging and unhelpful behaviors. And the most interesting thing I got is as I was writing it and people started reading it, they're like, I've either been that person or I am that person. And even myself, as I was writing the book, I'm like, oh my gosh, I do this, right?
Mm.
And so for leaders that are leaders today, it's a great read because you want to make sure that you're minimizing some of these unhelpful behaviors. You're spotting them, you're becoming self aware, and you're like, gosh, maybe I should write things down myself so I don't solve the same problem 5 different ways and just randomize my team. Or maybe instead of just listening to the last thing the C-suite asked me to do and disrupting and dragging everybody off something they've been working on for months, I push back and I say, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to stop this. Is that okay? All right. And so that's the example of a LIFO manager, the last in, first out. The last thing that they hear is the first thing that the teams now do,
Mm.
regardless of where they were in their work. So we've all had these different types of behaviors. And I expect, like a lot of people, as they read the book, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I was just in the meeting where this happened, or I've had that manager, or I've been that manager. And so I kind of go through what the advice is for those archetypes. And then the second part of the book is all about knowing your worth. Like it's so if you're if even if you implement all of the recommendations in the book, you may not be successful, or you may not be willing to put the energy into solving this. And so one of the things I learned during my leadership journey at Microsoft is people don't quit teams, they don't quit companies, they quit managers.
Correct.
And so knowing your worth is important because you don't have to suffer in silence. You can try these remedies, but in some instances, or in all instances, they're not going to be successful. And that's where you go, hey, you know what? It's time for me to head out. It's time for me to
Yeah.
go look for another opportunity. And my father always said, the best time to look for an opportunity is if you're happy with the one you have, because you don't want to run out of a burning building and run into one that's more on fire, right?
Yes.
You want to run towards something, not from something.
Yeah, that's even better. Do you have I haven't read your book yet. I'm planning on doing it, but do you
Great.
have in the book or a tool that there's some sort of an assessment that the results would say, you are this type of archetype, you are this type of leader, or is it just apparent as you read the book?
I think it's more apparent as you read the book because I didn't want to be too clinically conclusive.
Yeah.
Because you may or may not have one or some or all of these things. I think it's more of a spectrum than like that's you. That's you're a LIFO, you're an amnesiac, you're an attack sub. You may firmly be in the realm or the spectrum that says like, nope, you're pretty much this person, but you may have elements of those behaviors. So I didn't want to treat it like it's a personality test or it's a
Yeah.
clinical diagnosis, but it's again, it's to kind of help you reflect on yourself from a self-awareness perspective, but also if you're dealing with some of these unhelpful behaviors, to give you recourse, to give you coping strategies, and to help you thrive. So the book's available on Amazon. It's live now. Love to hear what viewers and readers think of it. So you can reach out to me on the social platforms, author Eric Charran. You can also get me on LinkedIn. I'm out there as well.
Eric, great discussion. Good work. Stay
Thanks
in
so
touch.
much. It was great being on today.
Oh, it's
Appreciate
been
it.
wonderful. Thank you.
You got it.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newlund. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadervation.